Hey, this is Warren Redlich. I've been wanting to make a video like this for a while. There's a topic that I find fascinating. It's a general concept of dissidents. Dissidents. Dissidents are people who are outside of mainstream thought, who say things or talk about things that are not accepted by the establishment in particular. Probably my favorite dissident of the past who's become relatively unimportant today is Noam Chomsky. And the key thing here is I don't agree with Noam Chomsky on a lot, but he's willing to say things the establishment doesn't accept. And some of the things that he says are very accurate. I remember a long time ago, I read his book, Deterring Democracy. Brilliant book. So today we live in a world where we can't talk about freely. We can't talk about freely. We can't talk about freely. And if you talk about these things freely, you might get censored either formally by big tech. You might get censored in other ways. People in government might call for you to be shut down. And just the cancel culture can come after you. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. A lot of people have gotten to the point where cancel culture does not affect them anymore. Joe Rogan is a great example of it. When I say doesn't affect them, they get through it, but it creates pressure on them that can deter people from speaking freely or interviewing, in Joe Rogan's case, interviewing people who speak freely. Dave Rubin encountered this sort of cancellation, a guy who used to interview everybody, and all of a sudden he got pressure when he interviewed people on the right. And this is something that's bad. So dissidents are important, not that they're always right, not that they're necessarily accurate, but if you want to understand the world, it's helpful to see different perspectives. And when censorship shuts down certain perspectives, then you may not be getting the full picture of what's going on. People like to say they like to get two sides of the story. Well, what if there's more than two sides? And what if the two sides you're getting really aren't that different from each other? And what if some of the other sides are actually much more interesting? Just for example, myself, I'm a libertarian. And I think that Republicans and Democrats are not very different at all, even though a lot of people think Republicans are horrible if they're Democrats, or Democrats are horrible if they're Republicans. And yet, foreign policy has been pretty much the same for 77 years under Republicans and Democrats, 77, 80 years, something like that. There's been consistent interventionist foreign policy for a long time. We've had a drug war for over 100 years. Our border policies, we think that there are differences in border policies, but our border policies have basically been the same for decades. Whether you have a Republican president or a Democrat president, Republican Congress or Democrat Congress, there are slight differences between these two parties. And when you're inside that two-party world, you see those differences as very dramatic. But from a dissident's perspective, from outside, those differences are actually small. And those of us on the outside think a lot of people on the inside aren't thinking about how not different they are and what the alternatives might be. Really simple example. I think the United States should not have troops in any foreign countries. Zero. Not even sure we should have troops in our own country. We can have a militia defend the country if there was anybody who would attack us, and there isn't anybody who would attack us. Instead, we have troops in over 170 countries, and that is with bipartisan support. And we spend $1 trillion a year on a military when we are geographically the safest country on earth. It's absurd that we spend so much on defense when it's not really defense, it's really offense. We engage in protecting our strategic interests, which are really the interests of special interests, not your and I strategic interests, but rather the special interests who have bought and paid for government. Let's look at some dissidents really quick. And what I'm hoping to do is once a week or so, I'm going to do one of these dissidents and we'll find more. If there are dissidents you like to follow that I'm missing, please comment on this video. So this is Alex Berenson. Alex Berenson used to be a reporter or a journalist for the New York Times. Robert Malone, R.W. Malone or Robert Malone, is one of the inventors of mRNA vaccines. Eutychius is an unusual one. I think he's in Germany. So he's a European, and I think he runs anonymous. Berenson and Malone are openly who they are. Eutychius he writes a plague chronicle witnessing an unprecedented comprehensive failure of policy, medicine, and science. He is more covering what's happening in Europe than what's happening in the US. Unmasked is another one, obviously focused on the mask issue. Matt Taibbi. Now, Matt Taibbi, I think he used to write for Rolling Stone. I've loved his writing. Something about Matt Taibbi is it's the way he writes. He's just such a great writer. He has the style of his writing, and he's been a critic of, I think he was sort of an accepted dissident for a long time. And I think he's sort of still a little bit accepted, but he's still a little bit on the outside as well. This is Glenn Greenwald. Okay, so Glenn Greenwald is one of my top dissidents. He's a guy I've been following for a while. And I want to say, just like with Alex Berenson is a critic of allowing marijuana to be legal, at least as I read him. And I disagree with Alex on that. I'm not saying he's wrong about everything in his criticisms of marijuana. I think marijuana is probably more dangerous than marijuana advocates would want you to believe. But at the same time, I don't think it's as dangerous as Alex is telling you. But still, overall, his contribution is valuable. So you can disagree with a dissident. Now, Glenn Greenwald is anti-Israel, and I am generally pro-Israel. Now, my policies on Israel, my policy preferences on Israel is the United States shouldn't give any foreign country any money, and that includes Israel. And the United States should not get involved militarily regarding any other country, and that includes Israel. Now, we're not tactically military involved in Israel, but we're military involved in all the countries around Israel. So I think we shouldn't be. And a lot of people who are pro-Israel want the United States to give Israel money. They want the United States to intervene in countries near Israel to protect Israel, and I don't think we should do any of that. So I disagree with Greenwald, but Greenwald believes that basically Israel should not exist, that the Arabs should take over the land. That's how I read him. And or if he does have a solution that doesn't involve that, I don't know what it is. Most of the people who are critical of Israel don't really have a solution that would make any sense at all, because the Palestinians want Israel gone. And they don't seem willing to compromise. I haven't seen that compromise yet. And the Israelis aren't willing to leave. So how do you resolve that conflict? And Greenwald blames everything on the Israelis. And I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying that the Israelis don't do anything I would disagree with. But by and large, this is a country that's under constant attack by the Arab world, and the Arab world has spun the Palestinians as a victim class, even though I disagree with Greenwald on that particular topic. And he also writes a lot about Brazil, which just doesn't interest me that much. He has excellent criticisms of the mainstream establishment on a lot of topics. And last one, Catherine Brodsky. I don't know her as well. I've seen her writing a fair bit. I follow her on Substack. And she just... great writing, great thinking. Sometimes she says things and I'm just like, God, I love this woman. Trust in journalism has been eroding for some time now, and coverage of Canada is the most recent example. So what happened in Canada was, Brodsky says, I love journalism, what it can be and has been when done well, but something is broken. When the stories we are told are inaccurate, we make decisions based on false premises, and it undermines our trust in important institutions that are meant to serve us, not influence us. That's what's happened over the last few years. I would date it back to at least 2015. I just wanted to suggest some dissidents, and what I'm hoping to do in the future is maybe once a week I will do a dissident of the week, or maybe it'll be dissident of the month. We'll see how time flows. And I'll break down some of the really interesting things that these dissidents are saying that the mainstream media is not covering or hiding or lying to you about. And I hope you like that. So this is my introduction. I hope you like this. If you like this and you want to see these, the videos Dissident of the Week are going to be for paying supporters of the Daily Lie only. So please support the Daily Lie by becoming a paying supporter. I'll put links to the various Substacks that I just showed you in the description below. Thank you so much for watching.